Major support for Do the Math has been provided by Chevron, the Kern County Superintendent of Schools, California Resources Corporation, Kern Schools Federal Credit Union, Panama Buena Vista Union School District, Bakersfield City School District, and the San Luis Obispo County Office of Education, with additional production assistance provided by these supporters of education in Kern County and throughout the state of California.
We're here live at Ames Woodworks and Violins, joined by owner Sam Ames today. We're going to take a look at how math applies to another one of the fine crafts of woodworking. So Sam, first of all, thank you so much for having us in the shop today.
Thanks for coming. I love sharing.
This is our second year here with our shop, and for those of our viewers that might be joining us for the first time, tell us a little bit about Ames Woodworks and Violins.
So I started doing string instrument repair, violin family work about 15 years ago, and been doing that for quite a long time. Do a lot of work for the Panama District and players around town, symphony players. And I started tinkering into some woodworking endeavors a few years ago, and really enjoy working with rustic reclaimed material there. So the violin studio has kind of been overrun with some woodworking tools and other items, and doing a little bit of that now as well.
That's kind of the sign of growth, is when you start off with one specialty and you end up doing everything else in the process.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, if you don't mind, go ahead and give us a tour of the shop. Let's take a look at what we have to work with.
So it's fairly intimate. It's my grandiose 400 square feet, but as I kind of work the way around the walls, I've just got stations where I do things. I do some tool sharpening here at the sink, because I use all the Japanese whetstones for that sort of thing. Templates and trinkets for some other projects on this shelf. Drill press, of course. Clamps, various wood items of all kinds of shapes and sizes. Templates for projects that I've done before. Pizza peels.
There you go.
Yeah, done some pizza peel work.
Phenomenal.
There. So these are some blanks that are still waiting to be done out of some nice walnut, and going to cut those up this Friday, as a matter of fact. So yeah, I keep some of the storage in here. A lot of the instruments that wrap around as we go are usually bygones from repair work, previous tinkering things and making sure I know how to finish a certain repair a certain way. So they're kind of my Frankensteins that I keep out here in the shop, and I keep all the good stuff in the house. So
when a lot of our viewers, kids think of woodwork, they think of saws, and generally there's only a couple of different types of saws that they may be aware of. So what are the kinds of equipment do we have to be able to shape and mold and
Sure. So the staple of any workshop is, of course, the table saw. And this particular table saw that's made by SawStop is really kind of a cool saw. It has a unique feature on the inside that every parent would want their child to have if they were to work on woodworking items. It has an electronic eye sensor on the inside. So if the saw is running and your finger should unfortunately get too close to the blade, it pulls and retracts the blade in a nanosecond down inside the saw.
Oh, wow.
So it's a really good safety feature. So we paid a lot of money for it, but it's worth its weight for sure to not lose a finger.
So that's going to allow you to manipulate and cut through all kinds of different wood sizes, boards, or some of the flat panels that you might see.
Absolutely. Gets used every day and very, very often.
Now, one of the things we talked about is a lot of the work you do with metal workers or fabricators to help build the frames for some of the pieces that you put together. And
Sure.
There's an example of one that you've been working on here, a chair model?
Yeah, absolutely. So this week we're doing some commission work for a customer, and this particular item was a chair frame. So this is our frame here. So it's all been welded and powder coated and cleaned up. And then this is going to be the seat back, and then the seat flat will be made tomorrow.
Now, for those of you wondering at home, the sides of that, I'm sure, do not look very comfortable as just a set template. You know, one of the things we talked about is the idea that if you have a design in mind, you may measure things right, you may have an idea of what that's going to look like, but it's still going to take a few different prototypes or tries before you get it just right.
Absolutely. The chair has gone through multiple revisions to really get it comfortable and to get it to where it needs to be. And as you mentioned, yeah, there's still a lot of shaping and glue that has to be removed and cleaning up and rounding and softening to kind of get to that point. And lots of revisions. I think we went through about 10 revisions before we finally determined okay, this is the one that we really enjoy.
You mentioned some of your work with the symphony orchestra, and specifically working with violins. Take us through kind of some of the work that you might do with the standard model.
Yeah, so I've got a few things in various stages over here. So this was a violin that we had to remove the top on. So this is a violin top when it is off the instrument. This is a very inexpensive instrument where it was kind of hastily carved, but if they want to pay for the repair, we'll get the work done. So this top was similar to this. It was off, glued and repaired on the inside, and now it's been glued back together.
Now, in the world of violins, a little change can make a big difference in the sound. So what are the things that you have to take into consideration in getting the sound of the violin just right for the client?
So one of the biggest things that we really look at with an instrument is when a violin or a viola or a cello or any string instrument, ultimately any instrument is made, it really develops its own voice in the carving and the making process. How thick or thin what we call the plates, so the tops and the backs and the sides. Every instrument's going to have its inherent voice. Beyond that, it's really the setup, how well the bridge is made, which is the piece that goes here, what type of string we're going to use, are we looking for a louder sound, a softer sound. So we just try to complement what the maker has done with the instrument, if it's an individual single maker, and if it's more of a mass-produced, then we really emphasize making the setup proper so that it plays well.
You know, a little bit outside too, we mentioned the prototype design for this piece here. There is a bit more of a finished model out here that we can kind of look at, and you can kind of walk us through the approach and the idea behind it. So this is a bit more in line with where ultimately something like this will end up.
Yeah, so this got worked on a little bit this morning, so we were able to cut and trim off all of the excess, get the glue lines planed down. Still needs quite a bit of sanding. This particular chair, different than the one inside, is what we call a captain's chair. So it has arm rests on the side, whereas that one will just be a side chair and open seating. So this is kind of when we start to get to the point where we're removing the excess material, doing some math to determine our final lengths and widths, and what kind of round edge we're going to put on it.
So a little bit later on in the program, we're going to come back to Sam. He's going to walk us through some tips on making sure that we can use math to find the right size board of wood for the right project. Back here at Ames Woodworks and Violins with Sam Ames. So we were looking at some of the pieces here, and we had an interesting kind of revelation. We were looking at these two pieces of board, and we wanted to know exactly how much bigger one was than the other, because comparison-wise, they look fairly similar and almost deceptively. So what Sam and I were talking a little bit about is how we measure the material in woodworking, and we use a unit called board feet. Can you tell us a little bit about board feet, Sam?
Right. So board feet in the kind of lumber world is the length of the board in feet or inches, the width of the board in inches, and then the thickness. And so those are multiplied, and we'll get to that. And that helps us to determine how many board feet are in a particular board.
In a way, if you think about it, we're essentially taking the volume of the board,
Correct.
The amount of space that it takes up, and then condensing that into a unit of feet that we can compare, so that no matter what the shape is or the dimensions, we can put a tangible number as far as how much wood is in a piece. And we were looking at some calculations of that as far as how it aligns with some of the designs you've done. And a lot of the designs you do are on a field that is very familiar to a lot of our viewers, and it's just simple graph paper.
Sure. So oftentimes when I'm working on a project, whether it be a dining table or whatever the piece might be, I always like to chart it out to determine what my costs are going to be. It's a way that I need to give a customer a price for a particular job, but I also need to make sure that I'm not overspending or underbuying the material that's needed. So I generally plot this out, and all of these measurements that you see here, the thicknesses, are all different pieces. This is a particularly table piece that I'm going to be working on. So we've got the top at 8 feet long and 45 inches wide. Tabletops require an apron or a runner. And so all of these items are put together, and then that helps me determine how much material I'm going to need for the project.
So in the example for calculating board feet that you mentioned, you'd calculate the length in feet, and you multiply that by the width in inches and then the thickness in inches. And you can multiply these in any order you wish, because of what we know about multiplication. Now, after you do all that, you can divide it by 12, and that will get you the amount of board feet. So in this example that you had sketched out for us, we have a board that's 8 feet long, about 3/4 of an inch thick, and then 10 inches wide, to get us to a value of 60, which then we divide by 12, because there's 12 inches in a foot, to get to 5 board feet.
Correct.
Now, one of the things that I had questioned is, you know, since we have two different units, is it possible to do this in inches instead of feet for the length? And you said yes, but you do need to change something in the division.
Right, so if we were to calculate this out in inches, then we would need to divide by 144.
So because you're multiplying by 12 up here, you need to divide by another 12 down here to get to the same board feet of 5.
Correct.
So what we did was we took this calculation and we actually applied that to the 2 boards that we have over here off to the side.
Sure.
And we measured this out while we were away at break and started to calculate some of the board measurements on this. So just to kind of take a look at some of the calculations, we've measured this larger one.
Right. So this board, when I purchased, was indicated that it was 4 board feet. So we want to make sure we're getting our value for our money, and so we're measuring the board out. And let's get our length. So it's roughly, it's 97.5 inches, but from experience, I know that the industry is going to call this an 8-foot board.
Now, just for the sake of comparison, we have our shorter one, our skinnier one here. I'll say skinnier. It's got lower width. What is the length of this one here?
This one's going to come out to about 101 inches.
Okay, so it's about 5 feet longer or so, maybe.
About 5 inches or so.
Did I say 5 feet. Units matter. Vocabulary matters, ladies and gentlemen. So yeah.
And then on our our width, we know that this one is 6 inches. We've actually already written it here. And here, this is going to be called 4 inches. So it really comes out to about 3 5/8. But anything over the 1/2 of an inch, the industry rounds it up to the next highest number. So we know that that's going to be 4 inches, and 8, and a 1 inch on the thickness. Now the thickness, this is what we refer to as a 4/4 board. So it's just under a 1 inch on the thickness, but it's not quite 3/4. So in round numbers again, that's going to be called a 1 for the purpose of this.
And so if both of these are an inch thick, this gives you some numbers that now you can multiply out. So we had 8 times 6 times 1, and the nice thing about a thickness of 1 is you can basically just scratch that out. That's one less number you have to multiply by.
Sure.
You'll still do it technically, but we all know what happens when we multiply by 1. So it becomes very friendly. We have 8 times 6, which is 48,
Yep.
and then we divide that by 12 to get to 4. So this truly is a 4 board foot length of wood here.
Correct.
Now, if we apply that same logic over here, we have a board that's 8 feet long times 4 inches wide, so we're at 32 there. But then, again, multiplying by 1, so 32, we have to divide 32 by 12, and that ends up being a little more than 2 board feet. So, I mean, as a buyer, if you see that, you know, we're told that this is 2 board feet, and this is 4 board feet, we have some information that tells us a little bit otherwise.
But it sounds like we got a better deal on this board than we really should have. So there's the bonus.
Whoever we're buying from, keep it up. This is great. But that's important if you're buying materials to know exactly how much of a unit you're actually getting, because
Sure.
then cost comes into play.
It's our number one cost in the work when we're doing woodworking and that sort of thing. So when you look at units of other items like ounces of glue or a number of screws or bolts or other things, they're tangible items that you can physically count. Wood purchases and wood material is always kind of intimidating for people. And when they go to a box store or someplace where they really don't sell boards and board feet and they sell it by the board or by the linear foot, which is another conversation, you really don't know how much they need. And so if you understand how to do some of this and you know what the measurements are in your project, you'll be way ahead on making sure you get the right amount of material.
So this looks really interesting. We're going to come back a little bit later on and talk to Sam about how to get started in woodworking, some of the classes you may want to consider taking, and some of the things you can do right now to prepare for a hobby or career in woodworking. Back here live at Ames Woodworks and Violins with Sam Ames. We had a chance to talk a little bit about some of the pieces in the shop, and someone here had the question about some of the older pieces that you've had a chance to work with, and you were able to pull one literally right off the wall, and we were talking about this violin over here.
Yeah, so I've got the 2 endeavors, and one of my very first loves, of course, is all the violin work I get to do. But this particular instrument just came to me recently, belongs to a family friend, and it's going to be going to Los Angeles to a very reputable and high-end violin shop for an appraisal. But we were curious as to what was the oldest instrument I have in here, and so this violin's from 1730.
This is an artifact that is nearly 300 years old.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I look at some of the repairs that have been done to it literally over the centuries, and some of it very handsome, a lot of really, really quality repair work. But yeah, German maker, Klotz is the last name, and kind of a fun thing to share.
And one of the things you remarked on that we kind of shared is the idea that, you know, the general design of the violin has changed very little in all those centuries. It's almost identical to something you would see produced today. It's
really kind of considered, you know, there are different opinions about it, but the old design is the modern design, and you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So obviously some very, very good current makers and people that are doing a lot of work, but all of it really still based on a lot of the same patterns that were created by Stradivarius and other Italian makers and German makers and people back in the 1700s.
For some of our viewers at home that may have been watching this afternoon and are curious about how to get started in woodworking as a craft, what would you recommend?
So I took probably a little more of an untraditional path. When I first got into the violin world, I was studying largely on my own. Went to a lot of workshops and seminars as an adult. There really was kind of that window for me it had passed for me to go to violin making school, and there is actually a violin making school. There's a couple of them in the U.S. One of them is in Utah, and very, very well known and very, very good. So I did kind of the private path of looking, studying, working, dealing with some people that already had some hands-on experience. In the woodworking world, kind of the same path, but for students and people that are looking to get into it, there are lots of college programs and woodworking trade schools that you can go to, and working it as an apprentice in a wood shop or a cabinet maker shop, and getting some of that hands-on experience and doing some tinkering of your own is really a great way to do it. And as for an adult, for somebody like myself that picks it up as a hobby, if you can find some places where you can get hands-on experience with somebody else that already has that, it's invaluable.
As far as the type of math that you would recommend for students to really jump into and explore to be prepared for this, that would benefit them, what would you recommend?
So geometry is really incredibly valuable. We do a lot of basic math, as you saw, a lot of adding and subtracting, a little bit of multiplying and dividing. But there's so much geometry that goes into in all the different things when you get into angles and how components of a particular workpiece, whether it's the violin world or the woodworking world, is going to come together. So really sticking with those basics and understanding them thoroughly. I look back on my time with math and not wanting to be the best math student, but I couldn't live without it every day now. And whether it's advanced or it's basic, you will use it every day of your life.
Well, Sam, it's been great. We were here last year with the show, and a repeat visit, which puts you in very rare air with a rare company, and that is a two-time owner of our Do the Math Thank You tile. Excellent. As a supporter of the program. And again, you. Sam, thank you for inviting us into the shop this afternoon. Wonderful look behind the curtain of how these things come together.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I hope you guys will keep coming out, because by the time I get done collecting these, I'll be able to make a trivet or something out of the tiles. So I'm hoping to be a multi-year recipient.
Sam, again, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Major support for Do the Math has been provided by Chevron, the Kern County Superintendent of Schools, California Resources Corporation, Kern Schools Federal Credit Union, Panama Buena Vista Union School District, Bakersfield City School District, and the San Luis Obispo County Office of Education, with additional production assistance provided by these supporters of education in Kern County and throughout the state of California.